Welcome to the Common Sense Show. Today we are talking about public speaking, everyone's favorite topic. I remember there was a joke by Seinfeld about public speaking, and he said that people's number one fear is public speaking. Their number two fear is death, which means that they would rather be in the casket than give the eulogy. I thought that was pretty funny. But today I have the CEO of a public speaking school, Presence. She is wonderful. I can't wait to actually talk about that and just get some tips about how each one of us can become better public speakers in our business. That should be a core feature of being a business owner, because you have to appeal to people at all times. It's just kind of like part of the jam. So sit back, relax. I'm going to bring her up right now. Maryrose, welcome to the Common Sense Show.
Hello. Thanks so much, Micah.
So you are the CEO of Ewing School for public speaking, essentially, right? So you are all about public speaking. So you've kind of painted yourself in a corner today, meaning that you have to be completely articulate, mellifluous, and fluent. And
That's the name of the game when this is what you do.
You can't say you better not. We're writing it down. No, but seriously, I made the joke about public speaking, and of course, like I mentioned, Jerry Seinfeld did too, because it is a real issue with business owners. And as you know, working with business owners, that presenting yourself to a group of investors, to an audience at a conference, becoming a thought leader, all those things from the audience side looking on seems impressive. Like, I would love to do that one day, but when it's your turn to get up there and do it, can become something that turns you into a sculpture, for lack of a better word. Tell us a little bit about yourself, why you started the school first, and then let's dig into the meat and potatoes.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'll start off by saying that public speaking is something that anybody can become that charismatic speaker from the stage on, right? It's a skill that we build, and anybody can really become that person that you see on stage who just captivates an audience and really drives their message home. I got into this world actually because of daily lunchtime walks that I took with a guy that I was actually secretly dating at the time, because we were working together and he was getting frustrated with his boss and some different work stuff that was going on. And I kept pushing him. I was like, why don't you go do this? Go do this type of work on your own, right? He was doing communications training, working with folks going on TV, anybody testifying before Congress, people speaking on events, a lot of different scenarios. And I said, like, let's do this. Let's do this as a business and kind of check off the institution, the organization, the management, all of these things that are frustrating about working within an organization, and just start doing this for ourselves. And that was about 7 or 8 years ago. And we've, since that man has become my actual husband. And so we continue to run this business together and really just love it. And we found that there is such a need for public speaking training, right, across a wide gamut of business leaders, of entrepreneurs, of experts and leaders, right? All of these people who have ideas, have really important work that they're doing. And in order for that work to truly be successful, you have to be able to communicate it to other people, right? To other people, and get them on your side, on your team, and all working together. And so that's really what we do at the Ewing School, is just helping people clarify their ideas and then share them with confidence.
Were you already a good public speaker prior to starting your public speaking coaching? What because public speaking is an art, and everyone's ear hears something different. I had a gentleman on the podcast a couple episodes ago or so, when we were talking about the art of selling through messaging and branding. And we talked about the intonation of certain public speakers. We talked about, for instance, President Trump. Some people, he speaks, generally speaking, with pure like punctuation at the end of how he talks. His cadence tends to be a little bit a little bit more succinct and punctuated, whereas someone like President Obama had more of a had a sing-songy kind of more
Mhm.
mellifluent. He had a cadence to his speaking that was kind of very gospely, right? Maybe
Mhm.
intentionally, maybe that's just how he spoke. But like a lot of public figures have different types of public speaking styles, which appeal to different kinds of audiences
Mhm.
depending on what kind of did you think about public speaking in that way? How did you see public speaking in your own life kind of when you first started this?
Yeah, absolutely. I've always really enjoyed public speaking. It's always been a fun challenge for me. And it's funny, I actually the first time that I met my husband, his name's Bob,
Mhm.
was when he was came to a management um, apprenticeship that I was participating in, right, where they kind of bring post grads, just out of college and together, and he came and did the a public speaking class for that. And at the end, there was a contest, right? And I actually won that contest, and that was years before we actually rekindled and met and started dating and eventually got married, obviously. So yeah, I've always really enjoyed it. It's been a cool challenge. It's also something that I've worked hard to get better at, right? Even from starting this business, even throughout the course of doing this day to day for work, it's still something that I continue to think of, like, how can I get a little bit better, right? How can I get time in the trenches? How can I actually practice? How can I get feedback from myself, from our coaches on our team, from my audiences? And then each time that you step in front of anybody, thinking about how you can get a little bit better. So I've continued, over the years, going to Toastmasters, right? That's the international public speaking group. There are chapters all over the world. And we have one here in our little community in Durango, Colorado. And that's something that I've done going weekly to get in front of people to practice and continue to put yourself in the hot seat where you have opportunities to get feedback as well. And so it's absolutely something that thought about over the course of
Mhm.
my career, and then also something that I continue to think, how can I get a little bit better?
What do you believe makes a I'm going to ask you two questions. I'm doing this on purpose, right? They're two different words. What do you think makes I didn't say good, not yet. What makes an effective public speaker?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the effectiveness really comes down to having clarity on what is the thing that you're trying to accomplish, right? Really starting with what's your purpose in this particular communication, and what's the idea? What's the message that you want your audience to walk away thinking? And this is true whether you're doing a keynote in front of 1,000 people or just getting on a really important one-on-one conversation or in a meeting, right? To say, like, here's my big idea, here's what I want the audience, my listeners, to walk away thinking, and then here's what I'm hoping to achieve from that. And I think that that is essential to making sure that you're actually effective in accomplishing your objective with your speaking.
So giving some thoughts to what you're going to say and just structuring it. I remember I was doing a talk at a conference and I'm in the shower just thinking about I have this thing, right? Where I think to myself, I try to be as extemporaneous as possible. I think to myself, I curate typically all of my introductions,
Mhm.
and that's about it. I have an outline of what I want to say, but generally speaking, I find that if I can successfully, leave orbit, then I'm good. And so, and then I can just kind of like keep going. So I spent, I don't know, like a day just on my first two sentences. It sounds
Mhm.
kind of insane, unless you're a public
Mhm.
speaker. But for me, I felt like what I said first, the first two sentences of what I was going to say, would have the most impact, and that you have like seconds to hook somebody,
Mhm.
and I was told after the conference like how effective it was. But like, do you think that do you consider preparation um of like how you like outline versus manuscript, right? Like you see this all the time.
Mhm.
You see people like public speakers, they always have these note cards, whatever, and they're flipping through it. And yeah, I understand they want to stay on message, but what does that do to the actual conversation, the naturalness of the
Mhm.
conversation, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, I love that you spend so much time thinking about your opening. I think that that's awesome, and exactly what I would love any speaker, especially for a high stakes speaking opportunity, to totally crush that opening.
Yeah.
And next, Micah, I would encourage you to do the same thing for your last two sentences,
Oh, I
right?
do.
Because those, okay, great. Because those are the big two opportunities, right?
Right.
How do you capture attention? And then how do you leave that final lasting impression?
Mm.
And then I agree with you. I love an outline. Like coming back to like, what's that one key idea, that one big idea that you want the audience to remember, and using
Mm.
that as your anchor to get you from the beginning through all of the different content you want to share in the middle and then to your
Right.
end. We really try to pull people off of scripts. I say, if you sit down and write a script, it's going to sound like you're just reading an essay, like you opened a
Right.
book and you started reading from it, right? It's really, really hard to make a script sound natural and then to deliver it so that it feels natural, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's huge, to feel like audiences are getting like the authentic you and they're not getting just some sort of stilted version. And so I definitely say yes, an outline. And that's where clarity comes in. When you have really strong clarity on what you want to say, then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes a lot easier to just keep that idea in your head and go through the rest of your message.
You think people get imposter syndrome when it comes to what they're saying because they're like, if you were to ask them in any other context, any other format outside of public speaking, okay, you're a computer cybersecurity specialist. Tell me the three biggest threats to
Mhm.
cybersecurity as they exist today. If you were to get a cybersecurity specialist, I don't know, in a one-on-one setting where you're sitting down, they could probably rattle off the three top cybersecurity threats as they exist today to you without batting an eye, and they can do it articulately without
Mhm.
stumbling over their words. As soon as you put a audience in front of them, though, it becomes a whole different story. It's like, do you think that them sticking to the expertise, there's something to be said for, you already know everything that you're going to, you don't
Mhm.
have to reinvent the wheel. Just go out there and just talk how you
Mhm.
you've already put all the information inside of you and inside your brain. Just go out there and talk.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you'd be surprised how often we do a lot of storytelling work with clients, right? And how often somebody has written a personal story that they're going to share on, their origin story. How did you get into this work? And they've written it and then are reading it. And you don't have to read that, right? You can just tell
No,
that to me
you
and
lived
get
it.
some reps in on it. You actually lived it. And so absolutely. I think in particular with experts, it's a bit of, we could talk about like the curse of knowledge, right?
Mm,
Which is this idea where once you know something, it's so hard to remember what it's like to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who doesn't know that. And so I
right.
think experts often discount their level of expertise and don't recognize that like the audience that you're speaking to does not have all of the knowledge that you have. And then experts also love to caveat and say, well, I don't know everything, right? They recognize how much is left in their field to
Mhm.
know and to learn and grow in. And so they really are hesitant to put themselves like on that stage in the role of an expert and worry about people seeing them as all knowing or something omnipotent, right? And that
Right.
and that that really creates this fear in them, that they recognize they don't have absolute knowledge on something, but
Mhm.
they forget how much they know that the audience doesn't.
Yeah, knowledge gaps. That's an interesting one. Like, I forget where I heard it, but it was something approximating, you could be considered a genius by people who are watching or listening to you if you just have a slightly higher level of sophistication with whatever the knowledge base that you're talking about than the person who's listening to you. If you're just one step ahead of someone, then you can talk about that one step and everything you learn in between. That is a big deal because what the
Mhm.
audience doesn't know, they don't know. So I think to your point, leveraging what you do know in front of people, there's a reason why you were asked to speak. Leveraging what you do know in front of an audience who may not be as sophisticated as you, you just go with it. Just go with what you know.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
So, all right. So let's talk about stage presence, right? Because
Mhm.
you walk out there to give a speech, a talk, and one of the things people do when they're stressed out. Well, I'm a big body, you know, body language guy. I got certified. One of my fun facts, I got certified in body language tactics. And a lot of a lot of speakers, what they do to relieve stress or tension when they speak, if they have notes with them or outline, is they hold on for dear life
Mhm.
to the notes. But what message does that convey to the people who are looking at them?
Yes, absolutely. Anything in your hand, anytime that you're clenched, that immediately sends signals that you're nervous, that you're uncomfortable, and then that's going to lower your credibility, your status, your authority. And so you really want to be able to focus on like relaxing, having open hands, open postures. And yeah, it makes the audience wonder like, "Hey, I'm sitting here listening to you because you have something to share with me, but you're sending the signal that you actually maybe don't know as much about what you're talking about as you really do." And oftentimes like scripts, note cards, outlines, like these tools that we bring up onto stage really become a crutch.
Hmm.
Right? There's sometimes that people do, they haven't had as much time to prepare as they want. Like they really do need those in order to get through everything. But I always see speakers are so hesitant once they've been using them to leave them behind, even if they don't actually need them.
I feel like your audience, whether it's an investor, whether it's at a conference, will give you some level of grace when it comes
Mhm,
to your nervousness, but they tend
mhm,
to do it at the beginning when you first start talking. If and then it catches up with you. Like, so if you if you're still nervous halfway through it, people are gonna think that there's something actually wrong, or like you said, you kind of lose
mhm,
credibility fast in the middle of what you're saying. How can a person calm down if they kind of spiral? So sometimes like
mhm,
giving a presentation is kind of like the stock market, right? Where like you hit your intro, you're feeling good, you have a rhythm, you blank out for a second, and then the shakes start happening. How does a person recenter themselves to keep delivering the message?
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with what you said in terms of the audience. Like the audience wants to like you, right? Nobody wants to watch a speaker who's horribly uncomfortable or does a terrible job. Everybody is rooting for
Right.
you. They're on your side.
Yep.
And so yeah, absolutely right. Like we already talked about, really knowing exactly your first opening like 30 seconds even, and
Mhm.
having that totally in your blood, totally internalized, even memorized, because that's when you're going to be at your peak nervousness. Is that first moment walking out onto stage, and that's where you're most likely to experience, right, like a brain freeze or, just totally blank out. And so definitely remember memorizing that opening. And then obviously a lot of practice, right? The more that you actually practice and run through your presentation, you can isolate specific parts. If you know that, okay, I've got my opening down, but this transition halfway through, that's been a sticking point.
Mm.
Practice that more than you practice the overall speech. And then the biggest thing to really control our psychosomatic responses, right,
Mhm.
is breathing. And
Yeah.
oftentimes when we're nervous, we talk faster, we stop pausing.
Right.
And those pauses are opportunities to get breath, which allows our body to relax, right? If you're kicking into fight or flight mode, the breath is what's going to help you calm down. And often speakers don't realize that you can pause for a pretty long time before your audience starts to wonder what's going on. Right? You
Mm.
can pause for 3 or 5 seconds, which is long enough for you to get your body back under control, get your notes back in order, but not long enough for your audience to almost even notice.
Mm. Yeah, that's actually interesting. Very fascinating. 3 to 5 seconds.
Mhm,
I never even knew that, but it makes sense. Especially there, sometimes there are people out there that use pregnant pauses to make a point, right?
mhm,
Because sometimes
mhm,
silence makes just as much of a point as the words that you're saying. I
mhm,
think that's very smart. As a business owner presenting to a crowd, even if you're not a business owner, if you're presenting to a crowd and you're presenting to someone that makes you nervous, what I found
mhm,
useful for me is measuring the room visually prior to the speech happening. So sometimes
mhm,
if you walk out and you're shocked at the size of the arena or the room that you're speaking in, that can kind of trip you out, right? And
mhm,
I find that like going in and kind of getting a measure of the room from the stage before people are sitting there, it's helped me to just kind of draw a frame, like a room around the room within the room, so I can kind of like know the unknown, which is how many people are going to be staring at me, how close is the front
mhm,
row, can I see their faces, stuff like that.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Anytime if you can get the chance to walk out onto stage before the room is filled, right? If there's like a sound check, these different things, that is huge so that you actually get that. And you can do that 5 times, right? Just
Mm.
walking out, pause. We always love to say, like, do a power pause at the very beginning, right? Like, draw in that attention with the silence, like you said.
Mm.
So walk out, do your pause, deliver your first line, and then stop, go back, do that 5 times. And you'll feel a lot more comfortable when you walk out and it's filled with people.
Yeah, brilliant. I like that. And so, how do you recover from a mistake that you know that you made, but the audience didn't know that you
Mhm.
made?
Yeah, absolutely. First thing, never apologize. Never ever. Even if it's obvious to the audience that you made a mistake, do not apologize from the stage, right? Unless you actually like set somebody on fire or something, right? You just don't apologize. You just have to push
Right.
through it, right? And I think that again, like pauses are just such a useful tool to a
Mhm.
speaker, which is when you realize, like, oh, I forgot to say this thing 30 seconds ago. And now how am I going to connect to the next point that I want to make?
Mhm.
Using those pauses can help you give your brain enough time to figure out where to go next. And then also I love to encourage people, right? When we're writing, like a lot of folks that we work with are really excellent, like great writers, and they love
Mhm.
their, really skilled. That's where they're strongest. And when we're writing, we have this feeling like we have to have these beautiful transitions. Like my essay has to flow very cleanly from A to B to C. When we're speaking, the audience doesn't need that, right? We can make
Mm.
a very hard pause with transition, right? So if you're talking about something over here and you're like, oh, I've totally lost like my smooth beautiful connection into this next idea, you can just stop and then start talking about something totally different, because your audience doesn't have the chance. Right, when we're reading, we can go back before and be like, hey, wait, what was that previous paragraph? Like I like got lost here. But when we're speaking, it's just totally in the moment. And so you
Mm.
can, if you've missed something, if you've made a mistake, you just totally stop and then start talking about something else.
Yeah, I think that's smart. Now, if you were to give us a few pointers, let's say three pointers
Okay.
on how to bring confidence to the stage, like how
Mm-hmm.
to appear confident even if you may not be, what would you say?
Yes, I mean, the number one thing is going to be practice, right? The
Mm.
more that you practice ahead of time, the more confident you'll be able to show up in on stage, right?
Mm.
Another two, I would definitely say eye contact is huge when we're looking at the ground all the time or looking up, even looking above our audience, right? That's a common thing that we hear is like look like at the point above their heads,
Right.
and it's still like you're still not giving eye contact, right? And so actually engaging directly with the audience, looking in people's eyes and making sure it's spread, right? If you've got like a long room, you're over here, right? Making sure that you're spreading that out. And
Mm.
then third would be just what we already talked about, which is like your body language,
Right.
right? So often we cross fingers, we cross our legs, we put our hands in our pockets, we clench, right? We do these different things that just totally signals discomfort. And so the more that you can get rid of that, to be open, having a strong stance, kind of like an athletic stance, like feet hip width apart,
Mhm.
that's going to signal confidence.
So the further away a person gets from their midline, the more confident they probably are in a large room or stage or wherever they are.
Yeah, to a degree, right? If you're not like starfishing or something out there. But yeah,
Right.
I think that that's a great way to think of it. If you're totally right, you want to take up space, right?
Yeah.
You want to own that stage, whether it's a big stage or just like at the board meeting, right? At the front of the table or something.
So, I do business coaching and consulting. I
Mhm.
often speak on business issues, of course. What I found when I first started this, so I've been an entrepreneur for over 20 years, and is that I had to, when I switched lanes from running my own business to trying to help others, I had to create ideas that
Mhm.
were not just blah, 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 marketable, but also had the ability to actually resonate with the audience, right? That I was actually speaking to. How can a person create clarity with the message that they want to get out there so that it actually does resonate? Because otherwise this is 2025. We've heard a lot of ideas, almost all of them. There's
Mm-hmm.
almost no idea
Mm-hmm.
that hasn't been articulated. But yet there's some people who repeat ideas that when broken down are just, time tested adages that have been around forever, but just repackaged in their own way. How can you bring clarity to those ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. That is it's a deep process, right? This is a
Hmm.
process of like sitting down, giving yourself like multiple hours at a time to just turn off the distractions, right? Get off of Twitter, turn off your email, turn off your phone, and just think and clarify. And that is when I encourage people to write, because writing forces us to take our ideas out of our head and articulate them in structured sentences and paragraphs, and you can look at it and say, no, that's not quite right, it's a little bit different, it's more of like this thing.
Yeah.
And it's this process of actually pulling your ideas out of your head and
Hmm.
getting them on paper or on the screen. And then this is somewhere that we work with clients a lot, is then talking that through with somebody, right? And so I'll get on a coaching call with somebody and they'll say, okay, well, here's my big idea. And I'm like, okay, like, and then I repeat it back to them. And they're like, well, no, it's actually a little bit more like this, right? And all of a sudden now we're just going back and I'm acting as a sounding board for them to continue to hone in and say, like, at the end, like, here's the single sentence. Here's the one sentence that I want to get across. But it does
Hmm.
not start as one sentence, right? Anytime that you see a really simple, clear message, right? Like Steve Jobs introducing the iPhone, the very first iPhone, right? And
Hmm.
he says, Apple is reinventing the phone. And
Right.
it's this very simple, clear sentence, but it did not start there, right? Anytime you see something that's incredibly simple, it always started as something, it's because somebody put effort into taking something complex and complicated and simplifying it. And for me, that really is a writing process, and then
Hmm.
an iteration process to say, okay, how do I make it a little bit better? How do I make it a little bit more clear? But then when you go to share that to an audience, when you go to speak that, you have to put the writing aside and speak it in your own words. And so that's where, again, and I really encourage people to use like a transcription tool. So if you wrote something, then put it to the side, don't look at it, and just pull out your phone and speak into it and try to reiterate in kind of natural spoken English. And then you can look at that transcript and compare it to what you've written and say, okay, did I capture this idea? There are things that I missed. I did I say the wrong word? Do I want to say this word a little bit differently? Right. And you can start to go back and forth like that.
A lot of people don't like hearing themselves on recordings. You knew this was going to come up today, people, if you're watching
Uh-huh.
this. Get over it. What's your take?
Yes, and it's totally true. It's like something that we've studied. Our voice it sounds different when we speak. Our voice sounds a little bit different because it's filtered through like our skull, right? It's not just coming in our eardrums where it's reverberating around our entire head.
Right.
And so when we hear it recorded, and then plus, audio recording equipment never captures the true quality of somebody's voice. And
Right.
so that's what happens, is that our voice sounds so different on a
Hmm.
recording than when in our own heads. And so it's totally true. People don't like it. But yes, the more that you can actually watch back the reality, we talk about aligning perception and reality. So, how do you think that you're coming across? And then how are you actually coming across to your audience? And the more that you can bring those into sync so you have
Hmm.
an accurate perception of your public speaking, of your communication skills, the better you are going to get at improving, right? And so that every time you speak to somebody, whether it's on a stage or in a meeting room, you're going
Hmm.
to be able to reflect and say, okay, here's how I want to be a little bit better. And you can start to give yourself real time feedback. But it does often, we have to be able to watch ourselves back to get that reality. And it can be painful. We'll also encourage people to say, you don't have to watch the video with the sound. You don't have to take it all in at once. We'll tell people
Right.
to watch the video, but turn off the sound. So now
Mm.
you're just watching your body language,
Mhm.
or turn off the video and just listen. And now you're not paying attention to what your body is doing. You're only listening to what you said, and vice versa. And then with a transcript, you can just read it too. So that's a
Mm.
little bit better without the pain of listening to your voice.
I remember I took a film studies class in high school, and you know, audio came up, and it was, they said
Mhm.
something, my teacher said something that I never actually forgot, but it makes so much sense. And now that, you know, we talk about public speaking, but like generally speaking, I always kind of took this to be true, which is that hearing someone's voice one to one, like you said, and listening to them directly across from you even sounds and feels different than them talking in the microphone. And the answer is why. That's because audio, digital audio, is not the person's voice. It
Mhm.
is a representation of your voice, which is actually what it is. It's not actually your voice going through, which is why it can be changed and digitally altered. It is your voice being technologically turned into what you sound like, a representation of what you sound like through the speaker. Which I think, to
Mhm.
your point about the natural, our natural language and hearing it in our head versus talking in a mic, we might we maybe it doesn't seem natural to us, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, it's absolutely true, right? Where it's a recreation of who we actually are, and we don't always like that recreation, even though it's not actually necessarily a reflection. Like everyone has, like, you have a lovely voice, right? Everybody has their own unique voice, but when we hear it a little bit differently, it it's jarring, right? It's a little uncanny.
One of the things I used to watch on television, I don't watch much TV, but one show I used to like a lot was The Blacklist.
Mhm.
James Spader, Megan Boone, and it was really good. I liked his character. He was a criminal. He was, one of those debonair criminals, like a narcissist, a sociopath, all the things. But it was compelling, and here's the reason why: is because when he would say something, he number one, he was knowledgeable about a vast array of different subjects, so well read. But the second thing that made that character interesting to me was that he told stories. So, for instance, he would introduce the whole premise of his character was that he was an FBI informant that was a criminal that would inform them about the worst of the worst criminals that they didn't know exist. So he had a blacklist of all these criminals that no one knew existed that were responsible for the hideous things that happen in the world, but people just thought that they were something that happened by some other means, not by the hand of somebody else. So he would point towards that list. But the way he did it was he would always tell a story first before he introduced the person that they should catch. And that, to me, his ability to tell a story is what was so compelling about the show. I say that to
Mhm.
say, I say that story to say that, in my opinion, storytelling, which has been around since the beginning of human history, is a great way, I think, to shed nervousness when it comes to speaking. So instead of
Mhm.
just talking about facts and structure and, the nuts and bolts and the text and the specs of whatever you're talking about, if it's a technical presentation, telling a story has way more impact, even with that, than anything else. What say you?
Yeah, absolutely. I love stories. Stories are an incredible tool. They do so much for us, and you're totally right. That's how we evolved. That's how humans really came together and connected, was through our ability to create symbols and to share stories. And a big part of what stories do for us is that they explain ideas. They help us understand things, and that information then gets passed along to other people
Mm,
because of stories. And stories, not only do they help us understand, they help us explain complicated, complex ideas, but they
mm,
also help us remember them. So
right.
an audience might not remember a single graph or fact or statistic or all of this complicated jargon and abstract explanation of the facts, but they do remember the story, right? And
Yeah.
that really resonates with us. And it's engaging. It's
Hmm.
enjoyable to listen to stories, and so it's a really easy way to get your audience to listen to you. And then when you can use a story to explain that key message that you want your audience to walk away thinking,
Right.
you've explained the message before they even quite realize the point. Right. And
Mm,
so you tell this story and then you give a moral to it. Right. So here's the lesson. Here's the takeaway. Here's the big idea. And yeah, they're beautiful. So I agree. I absolutely think stories are incredible. I think it's I'm curious I would love to hear more about how you think they shed nervousness, because I often find, like, working with experts, working with business leaders and executives, that
Mhm.
stories aren't comfortable for them, that they
Mm,
would rather be in the facts, in the numbers, in the spreadsheets, and talking about that than trying
mhm,
to figure out what's the story for this, and then tell stories, because they're also a little bit, especially if you're running a board meeting or something where it's unexpected to
mhm,
tell stories. It can be uncomfortable to lean into something that's not the social norm. Like, oh, well, everybody gets up and they do this presentation. They've got their slide deck with the numbers and the charts and all this stuff. So, like, that's what's expected. But you should really be leaning into what's unexpected, which is that storytelling, especially in that scenario.
Yeah, I think that part of I can talk about what I've experienced, which is I've asked myself, is the audience with me? Are they listening?
Mhm,
Are they taking in what I'm saying? Are they captured?
mhm,
Sometimes without a story, you don't know. But what I
mhm,
find is when you tell a story, people want to know the end of a story. So they want to know
mhm.
how did this end? How did this person get away? Right?
Yeah.
How did you actually get to the point where you can do X, Y, and Z? And so
Mhm,
what I would do is what I do now is I tell a lot of stories. And the reason why is because I'm the only one that knows what the ending is. And I
mhm.
find that I get more audience capture by actually telling a story that they have to wait for the resolution for until I'm done and whenever I want. I can expand the story. I can add in now I'm an experienced speaker, so I can add in hyperbole in certain places, while I'm talking. But I do know that the end is going to be a point that I made about 5 minutes ago because I told you to
Mhm,
remember this word. This is the word I told you to remember. And then I told you a story, and you don't have any idea about how that word I just told you 2 minutes ago relates to the end of the story. And then I tell the story, but you like, I don't know why you're telling the story, but I'm listening. And then at the
mhm.
end of the story, I connect the word to the story. And then I say, remember, I told you this at the beginning. That's exactly what happens. And then linking it together, I think it sheds nervousness because you kind of are just ex- you're painting and people are just kind of
Mhm,
watching you paint and
mhm,
it rids them of the expectation of what's going to happen because it becomes almost ambiguous what's going to happen because it's a story. It can go any way, right? You can go left, right,
yeah,
or straight or backwards in a story or up or down. Like,
mhm,
which way are we going? And I think what it does is it kind of shifts the power, like the nervousness power from the audience to you to the audience. Like
mhm,
there's a transfer of expectation of what's going to happen, even though the audience is
mhm,
expecting something to happen from the speaker. In the speaker's mind, it transfers like the power, the quote power differential of um, where nervousness should be. Like, because now the audience is anticipating. They may not be nervous necessarily, but I'll use that as a metaphor for them eagerly anticipating the point.
mhm,
How are you going to tie it all together?
mhm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think I love it. I think that's awesome. I love how you do that.
Of course, that's just my own personal take. I'm no expert, so I'm just telling you what I what
Mhm,
I think. But yeah, no, I mean what I do. But I think that it's so powerful to have. I think one of the things that you mentioned that I think is important is not to apologize when you make a mistake,
mhm,
and you see it sometimes when people are inexperienced speakers. They say I'm sorry, they shake their heads, they're lost, they derail for a minute before they come back. How can a person end strongly if they've made a mistake that's obvious in the middle? How do you conclude in a way that brings the audience back to what you want them to remember?
Yeah, I would say just, however you planned your close, right? Just because you made a mistake in the middle doesn't need to have any impact on the rest of your presentation or your speech, right?
Mm,
And so leaning into that, it can be hard because we feel like, oh, I've got to correct, or now the whole thing is ruined or something, right? But honestly, like, audiences forgive that. and we often think like, oh, it's super obvious that I made a mistake. It's rarely that obvious to
Yeah.
the audience, right?
Mhm.
Even if you accidentally like advanced your slide too fast and had to go back,
Yep.
that is out of the audience's head so quickly, right? They're
Mm.
not going to remember that. And so yeah, definitely coming back to whatever that key idea is, like that's the thing I always want people to close with is what's that key idea that you want to drive home and get in this audience's head. And if you've been using stories throughout, especially maybe you opened with a story, coming
Yeah.
back and referencing that story again, because that's your tool. The story is your tool to actually get it to stick, get your idea to stick in your audience's head. That's an excellent way to close, but I don't think a mistake should have any impact on how you finish.
Yeah, one other thing I wanted to revisit about what you said earlier too is making things simple. So the sign of true intelligence, in my opinion, is not making things more complicated. It's or
Mm,
solving or even solving of the complicated problems. It is turning the complicated things simple. It is
mhm,
making the person who can least understand a complicated thing, giving them the ability to understand it. And I think when you do that, you become something different than a public speaker. You become a public teacher, which is something completely
mhm,
different than a public speaker. And people like to be taught, even sometimes if we feel like we know everything. And so I feel
mhm,
like, when you make things simple, complex topics simple, it really has a way of drawing a person who's listening to you in, and keeping them engaged with there's going to be a lesson here,
mhm.
and I understand. This is the first time I've ever understood it. If you can get someone to walk away and be like, this is the first time I've actually ever understood that, I feel like you've been successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. I think it's a huge sign. Like the better that you understand something, like it's easy to explain complex ideas in a complex way, right?
Mm,
It's really hard to explain complex ideas in a simple way.
right.
And so when you hear somebody who's using really simple language and beautiful analogies, something that a third grader could understand, like that is a deep expert. That is someone who really knows what they're doing. And yeah, and there is a little bit sometimes, especially I work with a lot of academics as well,
Hmm.
going to these academic conferences and presenting papers and things like that. And it's like, oh well, they're like, they want this kind of complex, the jargon, the technicalities, and no, they don't. Nobody ever wants to sit and listen to a
No.
40-minute lecture that's like really hard to understand.
Right.
Everybody wants it to be simple and compelling and
Hmm.
to convey the idea, right? Like that is what audiences want. And so leaning into simplifying your ideas, but it is hard work, right?
Hmm.
When you actually sit down to do it, you're like, oh, maybe I
Right.
don't understand this so well, right? And it takes that clarifying work that we already talked about.
I'm going to ask Mary Rose a final question, which is going to be her big tip to become the best public speaker you can be. But before I do that, I just want to let you know, if you've watched this far, thank you. Make sure you like this video, because liking this video helps YouTube understand that you want to see more of this kind of content. Also, make sure that you subscribe if you're not already subscribed. And if there's someone who who sucks at public speaking, you can forward this video to them. But also, I have a weekly small business mastery newsletter. I would love for you to subscribe to it. It comes out every Tuesday. It's free, and it contains a bunch of information. Well, not a bunch, a single skill. My job is to upskill small business owners to get you better at running a better business so that you can make a lot of money. I want you to make all the money, all of it. So, in order for you to make all the money, you have to have better skills. Every Tuesday, I have a newsletter that comes out. Sign up for it, engage. It's free. Enjoy it. There will be a link to that in the description of this podcast. In addition, there will be a link to Mary Rose's public speaking school where you can contact them and get some coaching as well. Mary Rose, I need your big take. This
Mhm.
is the moment that everybody came here for, which is I didn't do a tease at the beginning. I should have. What is the one thing that a person can do to level up their public speaking? Like the one implementation takeaway today that they can implement today or
Mhm.
tomorrow that will allow them to become a better speaker than they are right now.
Yes, absolutely. It's change your mindset. right? Change your mindset to see communications and public speaking as a skill that you should be constantly honing and trying to improve, right? If you hate public speaking and you think you're terrible at it, shift
Mm,
your mindset to see that you can become an excellent public speaker. If you already think if you feel like a good, comfortable, experienced public speaker, I also want you to shift your mindset because you can get better, right?
yeah.
People who are comfortable, if you're experienced, if you've been doing this forever, you can still get better. You can still be even more persuasive, even more effective if you shift your mindset to see it as a skill that we will continue to build over our entire careers, over our entire lifetime, right? And really what that looks like is forcing yourself to get practice,
Mm,
right? Work with somebody to practice your speaking and get feedback, right? Take in feedback on what's going well, what's resonating, and then how you can make it better, and then apply that to iterate, right? Everything business is all about iteration. How can you do things a little bit different, a little bit better? It's exactly what your newsletter is. How can you apply new ideas, new concepts, new tactics? And that's exactly what you should be doing with your communications and your public speaking is see it as a skill that you can improve in with practice, feedback, and iteration.
Maryrose Ewing, thank you so much. That was amazing. Articulate, of
Thanks, Micah.
course. Fluent. It was all the things. You have a hard stop, so
Wonderful.
you have to go. So I'm going to let you go. But I appreciate you coming to the Common Sense Show, educating our folks. And I'm going to just continue on just a couple more minutes and close this out. Appreciate you
Excellent.
stopping by.
Thanks, Micah. Really, I had a great time.
Yeah, me
Bye.
too. Bye now. All right. So that was awesome. Public speaking is, I was watching a YouTube video with Jordan Peterson, and one of the things he was saying, if you can read, write, and speak, you're absolutely deadly. Reading, writing, and speaking is something that you get from having been in lower grades in school. Like, you don't have to be super educated to read, write, and speak well. It just has to be practiced. And if you can do that, you can do virtually anything. Jonesing Finance. Yes, it has been a while. Thank you for the encouragement. I will try to keep up the great content. I'm trying. Friend of the channel. Appreciate the support. You've supported me now for quite a few months. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for watching and stopping by. If you have questions about public speaking, feel free to comment those questions, and I'll see if I can get an answer for you, or I can get you in touch with Maryrose, and we can go from there. Well, I appreciate you hanging with me this afternoon. I'm looking forward to continuing more great content. Look, for me, because I still have a kid in school, a year is between September and August, not January through December, right? I feel like September through August is a year. I'm going to have a bunch of the season on the Common Sense Show. I'm going to have a bunch more guests. We have guests lined up through the winter, through the fall. I'm looking forward to actually talking with them. I appreciate you stopping by today to try to figure out how you can become a better business speaker, a public speaker, how you can display yourself to be more confident, because becoming a better public speaker will set you on a path and help you to establish relationships with people you never thought possible. We judge people based off of how they speak. It's just how sometimes you look at how a person looks, then you listen to them. And then when you listen to them, it can change your whole viewpoint of who they are. Developing public speaking ability will take you to the next level of everything if you apply the principles that you learned today in your speaking. Appreciate you stopping by, hanging with me today. I am going to head out. For Maryrose, I'm Micah. Until next time, peace.